Welcome, family. This is Troy Hines, and I want to thank you again for watching the Blood and Earth podcast. Today, we're going to talk about a war that I believe is one of the greatest tragedies in American history. Not because of its violence, but because of its silence. A war that helped to shape the land long before it was even called the United States of America. A war that most of America, doesn't even know existed. The Tuscarora War, which took place between 1711 and 1715. Before the land that was known as North Carolina was called that, it was sacred ground. The earth carried the footsteps of many different nations. The Cherokee roamed the mountains, the Catawba walked the valleys, the Meherrin, the Waccamaw-Sioux, the Saponi, each had their place in the circle of life. But it was the Tuscarora, the strongest amongst them, who stood as the guardians of the eastern rivers and the forests. But then suddenly, the winds began to shift. Pale sails arrived from the horizon, and from across those great waters came the English carving settlements along the Chowan and the Albemarle Sound, and they pressed inlands to the Perquimans and the Roanoke rivers. And they weren't alone. The French, the German, the Swiss settlers followed, building the town of New Bern by 1710. And the land began to groan under the weight of foreign footsteps. Now, among the Tuscarora, there were two kings. I'm going to refer to them as kings and not chiefs so that you can really hear this properly. So there was King Blunt, the diplomat, who sought peace and trade. And then there was King Hancock, fierce and unyielding, who saw the writing in the sky. He saw his people being pushed from their ancestral earth, and he refused to stand by. So on September 22nd, 1711 at dawn, the fury of the Tuscarora was unleashed. Along the Neuse and Pamlico rivers, 130 colonists fell in a single morning. And the land drank deeply of their blood. And for the first time, the settlers felt the weight of their own violence mirrored back at them. Fear swept the colony. Edward Hyde, who was the deputy governor of North Carolina, called for help, and South Carolina answered. They didn't send colonists. They sent warriors. 500 Yamasee braves and 30 white soldiers under Colonel John Barnwell. They didn't come as saviors, they came as harbingers of betrayal. On March 5th, 1712, the siege of Fort Nahuruka began, King Hancock's final stronghold. For 3 days and nights, the air was thick with all kinds of smoke, from tobacco to gun smoke. Screams and the clash of the Tuscarora against the Yamasee, brother against brother. It was more than a war, it was the unraveling of kinship. The forest mourned, the spirits wept. And when the walls fell, King Hancock was captured, and he was handed over to King Blunt, the very man who once called him a brother. Peace was offered, but it wasn't peace, it was a pause. The settlers violated every single promise. They desecrated the sacred. They took Tuscaroran women into the woods and left them broken. They enslaved their men, the women, and the children, and yet the spirit of the Tuscarora endured. Those who could escape, they fled northward, guided by the stars to find the 5 nations with Iroquois, becoming the 6th nation of the Haudenosaunee. But not all of them left. Many stayed hidden in plain sight. Some were absorbed into colonial life as servants, mistresses, as workers besides enslaved Africans. Others coalesced with neighboring tribes, giving birth to the Haliwa-Saponi, the Meherrin, and other native peoples of the Carolinas who still carry Tuscaroran blood to this day. So for 3.5 years, the land bled. And on February 11th, 1715, the war finally ended. But was it really an ending? Because peace never truly began. 2 treaties were signed, one placing survivors on a reservation in Hyde County. The other gave Blunt's people land between the Neuse and Pamlico River, but even that was temporary because more settlers were coming. They captured more Tuscarora. They sold them into slavery. They stole the land that had already been promised to them and then rewrote the laws to silence those that they had wronged. And by 1731, King Blunt's name had disappeared from the record, but the bloodline did not die. It transformed. It endured in the faces of those who could no longer call themselves by name and the children who grew up between worlds, and the stories whispered around kitchen fires that began with, "We have Indian blood, but we don't really talk about it." This is why the Tuscarora War matters. Because history is not just about what happened, it's about what we remember. The French and Indian War, everybody knows that. But this war, this one right here, was one of the first great conflicts of the South, one of the first sparks of resistance to colonization, and the first example of this land would consume its own truth. So I ask you, why don't we know this story? Why are our children not told that soil beneath their feet was once soaked with the blood of the first defenders of this land, and that those are their relatives, that they're related to those warriors? So today we remember the fallen, the forgotten, the ones who refuse to be erased. Thanks for watching. This is Troy J. Hines, Rahoni Wayi. Continue to watch Blood and Earth. Like, comment, and subscribe.